Fucking burn myself.
Is there? Has you turned it on?
That's pretty dope.
This is like
Yeah.
put the coffee in.
And it's so perfectly placed. Look at that. Even spaces.
What kind of butter is this?
Added sandwich.
It looks so good.
Give it all that flavor to the salad.
Especially when it has that skin.
Yes.
4
minutes.
4 minutes, part 2.
4 minutes.
No, there's no
I'm messing with you.
They're not working with me.
I'm so sorry.
They're meteoroids. I saw John's tweet for that.
They're like, oh, let.
I can get tired.
Shooting stars.
I like her. She doesn't struggle.
¿Quieres que ponga más water? Yeah.
Alright, so guys.
One more time, Dingo. Really?
Drink up.
I'll explain. Like rock. I know. I have a feeling.
Chapter 3. In Berkeley, I was living with Alva Goldberg in his little rose-covered cottage in the backyard of a bigger house on Milvia Street. The old rotten porch slanted forward to the ground, among vines, with a nice old rocking chair that I sat in every morning to read my Diamond Sutra. The yard was full of tomato plants about to ripen, and mint, everything smelling of mint, and one fine old tree that I loved to sit under and meditate on those cool, perfect, starry California October nights, unmatched anywhere in the world. We had a perfect little kitchen with a gas stove, but no icebox, but no matter. We also had a perfect little bathroom with a tub and hot water, and one main room covered with pillows and floor mats of straw and mattresses to sleep on. And books, hundreds of books, everything from Catullus to Pound to Blythe to albums of Bach and Beethoven, and even one swinging Ella Fitzgerald album with Clark Terry, very interesting on trumpet, and a gold 3-speed Webcore phonograph that played loud enough to blast the roof off, and the roof nothing but plywood, the walls too, through which one night in one of our Zen lunatic drunks, I put my fist in glee and Coughlin saw me and put his head through about 3 inches. About a mile from there, way down Milvia, and then upslope toward the campus of the University of California, behind another big old house on a quiet street, Hilgus, J.F. lived in his own shack, which was infinitely smaller than ours, about 12 by 12, with nothing in it but typical J.F. appurtenances that showed his belief in the simple monastic life. No chairs at all, not even one sentimental rocking chair, but just straw mats. In the corner was his famous rucksack with cleaned up pots and pans all fitting into one another in a compact unit, and all tied and put away inside a knotted blue bandana. Then his Japanese wooden pata shoes, which he never used, and a pair of black inside pata socks to pat around softly and over his pretty straw mats, just room for your 4 toes on one side and your big toe on the other. He had a slew of orange crates, all filled with beautiful scholarly books, some of them in Oriental languages, all the great sutras, comments on sutras, the complete works of D.T. Suzuki, and a fine quadruple volume edition of Japanese haikus. He also had an immense collection of valuable general poetry. In fact, if a thief should have broken in there, the only thing of real value were the books. J.F.'s clothes were all old hand-me-downs, bought second-hand with a bemused and happy expression in Goodwill and Salvation Army stores, wool socks torn, colored undershirts, jeans, work shirts, moccasin shoes, and a few turtleneck sweaters that he wore one on top of the other in the old, cold mountain nights of the high Sierras in California and the high Cascades of Washington and Oregon, on the long, incredible jaunts that sometimes lasted weeks and weeks with just a few pounds of dried food in his pack. A few orange crates made his table, on which, one late sunny afternoon, as I arrived, was steaming a peaceful cup of tea at his side as he bent his serious head to the Chinese signs of the poet Han Shan. Coughlin had given me the address, and I came there, seeing first Chafee's bicycle on the lawn in front of the big house out in front, where his landlady lived, then the few odd boulders and rocks and funny little trees he'd brought back from mountain jaunts to set in his own Japanese tea garden or tea house garden, as there was a convenient pine tree sopping over his little domicile. A peacefuler scene I never saw then, when, in that rather nippy late red afternoon, I simply opened his little door and looked in and saw him at the end of the little shack, sitting cross-legged on a paisley pillow on a straw mat with his spectacles on, making him look old and scholarly and wise, with book on lap and little tin teapot and porcelain cup sitting steaming at his side. He looked up very peacefully, saw who it was, and said, "Ray, come in," and bent his eyes again to the script. What you doing? Translating Han Shan's great poem called Cold Mountain, written 1,000 years ago, some of it scribbled on the sides of cliffs hundreds of miles away from any other living beings. Wow. When you come into this house, though, you've got to take your shoes off. See those straw mats? You can ruin them with shoes. So I took my soft-soled blue cloth shoes off and laid them dutifully by the door, and he threw me a pillow, and I sat cross-legged along the little wooden board wall, and he offered me a cup of hot tea. "Did you ever read the Book of Tea?" said he. "No, what's that?" "It's a scholarly treatise on how to make tea utilizing all the knowledge of 2,000 years of tea brewing. Some of the descriptions of the effect of the first sip of tea and the second and the third are really wild and ecstatic." Those guys got high on nothing, huh? Sip your tea and you'll see. This is good green tea. It was good, and I immediately felt calm and warm. Want me to read you parts of this Han Shan poem? Want me to tell you about Han Shan? Yeah, Han Shan, you see, was a Chinese scholar who got sick of the big city and the world and took off to hide in the mountains. Say, that sounds like you. In those days, you could really do that. He stayed in caves not far from a Buddhist monastery in the Tanxing district of Tiantai, and his only human friend was the funny Zen lunatic Shi Te, who had a job sweeping out the monastery with a straw broom. Shi Te was a poet too, but he never wrote much down. Every now and then, Han Shan would come down from Cold Mountain in his bark clothing and come into the warm kitchen and wait for food. But none of the monks would ever feed him because he didn't want to join the order and answer the meditation bell 3 times a day. You see why in some of his utterances, like, "Listen, and I'll look here and read from the Chinese," and I bent over his shoulder and watched him read from the big wild crow tracks of Chinese signs. Climbing up a cold mountain path. Cold mountain path goes on and on. Long gorge choked with scree and boulders. Wide creek and mist-blurred grass. Moss is slippery, though there's been no rain. Pine sings, but there's no wind. Who can leap the world's tides and sit with me among white clouds? Wow. Of course, that's my own translation into English. You see, there are 5 signs for each line, and I have to put in Western propositions and articles and such. Why don't you just translate it as it is? 5 signs, 5 words. What's those first 5 signs? Sign for climbing, sign for up, sign for cold, sign for mountain, sign for path. Well then, translate it, climbing up cold mountain path. Yeah, but what do you do with the sign for long, sign for gorge, sign for choke, sign for avalanche, sign for boulders? Where's that? That's the 3rd line. Would have to read long gorge, choke, avalanche, boulders. Well, that's even better. Well, yeah, I thought of that, but I have to have this pass the approval of the Chinese scholars here at the university and have it clear in English. Boy, what a great thing this is, I said, looking around at the little shack. And you sitting here so very quietly at this very quiet hour, studying all alone with your glasses. Ray, what you got to do is climb a mountain with me soon. How would you like to climb Matterhorn? Great, where's that? Up in the high Sierras. We can go there with Henry Morley in his car and bring our packs and take off from the lake. I could carry all the food and stuff we need in my rucksack, and you could borrow Alva's small knapsack and carry extra socks and shoes and stuff. What's these signs mean? These signs mean that Han Shan came down from the mountain after many years roaming around up there to see his folks in town and says, "Till I recently stayed at Cold Mountain, etc. Yesterday I called on friends and family. More than half had gone to the Yellow Springs. That means death. The Yellow Springs now morning I face my lone shadow. I can't study with both eyes full of tears." That's like you too, Jaffe, studying with eyes full of tears. My eyes aren't full of tears. Aren't they going to be after a long, long time? They certainly will, Ray. And look here. In the mountain it's cold. It's always been cold, not just this year. See, he's real high, maybe 12,000 or 13,000 feet or more way up there, and says, "Jagged scarps always snowed in, woods in the dark ravines, spitting mist. Grass is still sprouting at the end of June. Leaves begin to fall in early August. And here I am, here am I, high as a junkie. That's my own translation. He actually says here, am I as high as the sensualist? He actually says, here am I as high as the sensualist in the city below. But I made it modern in high translation. Great. I wonder why Han Shan was Jaffe's hero. Because, said he was a poet, a mountain man, a Buddhist dedicated to the principle of meditation on the essence of all things. A vegetarian too, by the way, though I haven't got on that kick from figuring maybe in this modern world to be a vegetarian is to split hairs a little, since all sentient beings eat what they can. And he was a man of solitude who could take off by himself and live purely and true to himself. That sounds like you too. And like you too, Ray. I haven't forgotten what you told me about how you made it in the woods meditating in North Carolina and all.
Hey, that's how everything
Jaffe was very sad, subdued. I'd never seen him so quiet, melancholy. Thoughtful, his voice was as tender as a mother's. He seemed to be talking from far away to a poor yearning creature, me, who needed to hear his message. He wasn't putting anything on. He was in a bit of trance. Have you been meditating today? Yeah, I meditate first thing in the morning, before breakfast, and I always meditate a long time in the afternoon, unless I'm interrupted. Who interrupts you? Oh, people. Coughlin sometimes, and Alva came yesterday, and Roll Sturluson, and I got this girl comes over to play Yabyum. Yabyum? What's that? Don't you know about Yabyum, Smith? I'll tell you later. He seemed to be too sad to talk about Yabyum, which I found out about a couple of nights later. We talked a while longer about Han Shan and poems on cliffs, and I was going away. His friend Roll Sturluson, a tall, blonde, good-looking kid, came in to discuss his coming trip to Japan with him. This Roll Sturluson was interested in the famous Ryoanji rock garden of Shokuji Monastery in Kyoto, which is nothing but old boulders placed in such a way supposedly mystically aesthetic as to cause thousands of tourists and monks every year to journey there to stare at the boulders in the sand and thereby gain peace of mind. I have never met such a weird yet serious and earnest people. I never saw Roll Sturluson again. He went to Japan soon after, but I can't forget what he said about the boulders to my question. Well, who placed them in that certain way? That's so great. Nobody knows. Some monk or monks long ago. But there is a definite mysterious form in the arrangement of the rocks. It's only through form that we can realize emptiness. He showed me the picture of the boulders in well-raked sand, looking like islands in the sea, looking as though they had eyes, declivities, and surrounded by a neatly screened and architectural monastery patio. Then he showed me a diagram of the stone arrangement with the projection and silhouette, and showed me the geometrical logics and all, and mentioned the phrases lonely individuality, and the rocks as bumps pushing into space, all meaning some kind of co-ed business I wasn't as much interested in as in him, and especially in good kind Japhy, who brewed more tea on his noisy gasoline Primus and gave us added cups with almost a silent oriental bow. It was quite different from the night of the poetry reading.